All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Okay, so when it comes to building a Power BI report, right? The main thing as a data analyst or as an analyst, whether you're using any data analysis tool, be it Power BI, SQL, Excel, Python, Tableau, any tool at all, the main reason why you're analyzing data is because you want to answer what a business question or a series of business questions. So if you do not have, business questions to answer, there's no point, starting your analysis because where are you even, going to start from, right? So the whole point of, having business questions is to, guide your analysis so that you can analyze your data from, certain angles and, from, certain so that you can analyze your data, how the stakeholders want it. So now we're going to be looking at, the project brief, or you can call it what a business scenario. So it's going to tell us, what this entire analysis we're going to be doing today. So we're going to see what is all about. All right, so let me go into the project brief. All right, so the analysis we're doing today is pharmacy sales and profitability analytics. So it's actually a data challenge, I think Onyx around January this year. All right, so in this challenge, we are to analyze the data set representing an European pharmacy chain distributor operating across multiple European countries. So the data set includes daily sales, transactions by pharmacy and products, with supporting dimensions for time, geography, and product hierarchy. All right. So now when it comes to Power BI, right, or analysis at all, you have what you call your stakeholders, right? So your stakeholders are the people you are building the report for. So your stakeholder can be anybody. It can be your fellow analyst. It can be your manager. It can be a layman on the street. It can be, a student. It can be anybody, but it just means, the end users of your report. So those are what your stakeholders. So now they said what your task is to build a BI report that helps stakeholders understand. So these 3 points here are what are the main aim of your of the report. So these are what the main questions that the report should answer at the end of the day. So we want to know how sales and profitability vary across countries, regions, and individual pharmacies, how different product categories and brand perform in different locations, and how regional performance contributes to overall business results. All right. So now, after looking at the aims of the report, we also have what key questions. So these are like the objectives of the report, right? So these are like when we're looking at what the aims at the deeper level. So our report should also answer what these key questions like how do revenue, units sold, and margin change over time? Which pharmacies outperform or underperform? Which product categories and brands? So the reason for these questions is that at the end of the day, when we're done with the report, we should be able to come back to this report brief and make sure that our report answers all these questions. All right. So now let's come to Power BI and bring in the data so that we can look at it and understand what the data is about. So our data is in an Excel workbook. So we're going to import it. So we're going to click here, import data from Excel. We can also click here, Excel workbook. So we'll click on it. Then we locate the data. Yeah, so this is our data set here, European pharmacy sales and profitability analysis. So we're going to bring it in. All right, it's loading. All right, so our data set is actually in 4 tables. So it's actually a star schema data set. A star schema in the sense that it has what a fact table and connecting dimension tables. All right, so we're going to bring them in. So these are our tables here. We have the dim date, the dim pharmacy, dim product, and the fact sales. So we want to change something. So we want to transform the data a little bit. So we're going to click on transform data instead of loading it, directly. Right. So we'll wait for it to load. All right. So clicking on transform data takes us to Power Query, to our Power Query editor, where we'll be able to transform the data. All right. So like I said, we have 4 tables. So we have the fact table and 3-dimensional tables. So like I said in our previous classes, what is a fact table, right? A fact table is that table that it contains the quantitative part of the data, right? So since this is a sales data, so our fact sales is meant to, contain, those numbers that we can track, the numerical part of the data, the quantitative part. So like the units sold, the revenue, the cost, the margin, and other things. And as expected, the fact table is meant to, have the most number of rows because it is the one actually recording the events that were carried out. All right, so let's do some transformation here. So it is the challenge data. So it's clean up to an extent. So we're not really doing so much data cleaning. So we just change some data types here. All right. So since this is the fact sale, so we have the revenue, right? So we want to change this revenue here to a fixed decimal place, since it is a monetary value. So yeah, add new step. Then we'll do the same thing for cost. So we'll do the same thing for margin also. So the margin is basically the same thing as your profit. So that is the revenue minus the cost. So let's see if there's any other thing. All right. So we also come to dim product. So this is our first dimension table. So the dimension table contains the qualitative or the descriptive part of the data. So your dimension table, they give you more insights into the data in the fact table. So we have dim product. So dim basically means dimension. So it's signifying that this is a dimension table. So the dim product contains information about the products that were sold in the fact sales. So that's why we have product ID, product name, category, brand, whether it is generic or not, pack size, and all this. So we don't really have anything to do here. All right. So also come
Sorry,
to dim
sir,
pharmacy.
please. Can you increase the volume from the screen size from your end? It's kind of small.
Oh, this is Power Query, so I can't really do that. But don't worry, when we're in the report, you'll be able to see it. I can't really increase it, like it is kind of static. All right, so this is the dim pharmacy, right? So this dimension table here is telling us more about the pharmacies where the products were sold. So that's why we have columns like the pharmacy ID, pharmacy name, the country where the pharmacy is located, region, city, and lastly we have the dim date. Right, so the dim date is giving us more information about the time when, or the date when the sales happened, right? So we have the date key, which is the primary key of the table. We have the date itself, the year, quarter, month number, month name, and all that. All right, so okay, so one thing I would love to change here is I'll just change this month name. I'll just change it to month. So I prefer it as month instead of month name. Yeah, so that's all we are doing. So once you're done with the transformation, right, you just click on close and apply so that it will load the data set into Power BI. So we're going to wait for that. So I'm going to wait for the data sets to load. Okay, it's taking some time. Oh, it's surprisingly taking a lot of time. All right, we just have to wait for it. Okay, yeah, okay, it's done. Okay, so once we are done with our data transformation, so you will find all your tables here, right? So one thing you want to do is you want to save it immediately. So we'll just save it here. You just let me save it in a particular browser, I mean a particular folder. So we just call it European sales and profitability analysis. Sorry, I missed something here. Okay, so European pharmacy sales. Okay, all right. So now we've saved it. We are good to go. All right. So after your data transformation in Power Query, the next step is to what? Is to model your data. Now, usually by default, Power BI, it's kind of models your data for you by default, in as much as it can recognize the primary key and in as much as it can recognize the primary and foreign keys in the tables, right? So from what Power BI have done, so we can see that the fact table it is in the middle. So that is like our star schema, right? So the fact table is in the middle, then it is connected to what the dimension tables via the one-to-many relationship. So we can see the many side is all on the fact table. So this side is representing what the many sides. So the dim product, we can see it is connected to the fact table by the what? By the product ID. Then the dim pharmacy also is connected to the fact sales by what? The pharmacy ID. Then lastly, the dimension date, the dim date, it is connected to the fact sales by what? By the date key. So there's something else we need to do, right? So since we have a month name here, Okay, so let's come to properties. All right. So since we have a month name here, so one thing we want to do, so we'll select the month. So one thing we want to do is because we in our reports we're going to be creating time series, right? But usually, the month by default is in alphabetical order, right? But we want it to be in chronological order. So from January to February to March. So how do we do that, right? So you select the month and you come to properties, you come to advanced. So you sort by column, right? So that is the whole essence of this month number. So the month number gives you what? A column that you can use to sort the month name. So by default on our data set, January is one, January is one, February is two, March is three. So that allows us to sort the month column by what? By the month number, so that it will return as what? It will return what in a chronological order. So let's just do that here. So we're going to sort the month by what? We're going to sort it by the month number. All right. So that is done. So we are basically done with the data modeling. We didn't really have much to do. All right, so the next step is to now start, building the report properly. So before we build any reports, obviously we need to have our DAX measures, because that is actually what we're going to use to build the report. So to create your DAX measures, we want to keep it very organized, right? So it is better to store all your DAX measures in a certain table, so that you don't start. So when you want to use it, you can just open that table and select it directly. So how do we do that? We click on enter data. So to create a new table, right? So we're going to name it measures. So underscore measures. So the reason why I used underscore is because I want it to be, so let me create it first. The reason why I use underscore is because I want the measures table to be at the very, very top here. Yeah. So as we can see, the measures table is what at the very top. So that is why I use the underscore instead of just measures. Because if I use measures, it's going to, work alphabetically, and it's going to be down here after F. So that is the use of the underscore. All right, so now we have to start, creating our measures, right? So, okay, so now let's come back to the analysis. I mean, to the business questions. So the questions, so from the business questions, you can kind of, tell what our metrics and what our KPIs are. All right. So what is a metric, right? A metric is, any, numerical value that you can track using your data analysis tool. So whether it is important or not, it is a metric. So far you can, track it with your tool, which is what a metric. What is a KPI? So KPIs are those metrics, right, that tells the business whether they are what's moving towards their goal or what further away from it. So that is what a KPI means. So KPI, it is short for key performance or indicators. All right. So from the business questions, so we can already, have a sense of what our KPIs are, right? So said what, how do revenue? So we can tell that revenue is a KPI, units sold, margin, what else? Yeah, so okay. So we have volume too. So that is obviously KPI because the stakeholders want to know more about it. Then we can also say, okay. So there's another one here too, profitability. So yeah, this is also what's another KPI. So sales volume and profitability. All right. So now let's start creating our measures. All right. So because of time, it will take a lot of time to, start keying in these measures, typing it one by one. So I'm just, going to bring them in. I already have, the file we have created, all the measures we'll be needing. All right. So the first measure we're going to create is going to be the total revenue. So let me just copy them. So copy it. Copy it. So don't worry, I'm going to explain it so that it won't just be like we're just using it without you having any idea what I'm doing. All right. So let's create our measures for total revenue. All right. So since we said the whole point of creating this measures table is to house what our KPIs. So that means anytime we want to create a margin, we have to click. I mean, anytime we want to create a new measure, we have to click on this. Then we'll come towards new measures, right? Or you can also right click here. Okay. So, or you can also click on this. Either you select it here, new measure, or you right click. So you can also create your new measure from here. All right. So the first measure we're creating is the what? Total revenue. All right. So let me zoom in. All right. So our total revenue is what? Is the sum of what? All the revenue what in the facts table, right? So that's pretty straightforward. So we're going to click here. So it's going to create our measure total revenue. So let's expand this. Then next up, we'll create a new measure. So next measure we want to bring in is what? Is is our previous month. So we want to create a measure that what calculates the revenue of the previous month, because we want to track the measures month by month. So how does this work? So the first thing we're going to do is we have to define a variable, right? So we have to define a variable that gives us the revenue for the current month. So that is what our total revenue that we created. Then also was define another variable that gives us the revenue for the previous month or for the last month. So how do we do that? We use the calculate function. So we say calculate total revenue, right? Then we add the comma. So the calculate is usually used when you want to add a filter to your measure. So we now bring in the date add. So the date add is a time intelligence function that allows you add what it allows you add a type of date to your filter. So since we want the revenue for the previous month, we are going to use the date add function. Then we're going to say so we're going to bring in the date table, right? So we're going to specify -1 since we want the previous month. right? We're also going to put in what? The month function. That is how the date add function works. So this variable here is going to give us the revenue for the previous month. So now once we are done defining our variables, we are going to return what we want. So we are going to return the value. So we are going to say if previous month is blank. That means if there is no revenue for the previous month, you should return blank, or else it should give us the difference between the current month and the last month. All right. So let's click on that. So now we've created that. This is actually what's it called? It's actually this part here is actually the variance between our current revenue and our previous revenue. All right, so the next measure we're going to be creating now, still under total revenue. So the next we're going to be creating is the label. Okay, sorry. Okay. So this is meant to be versus previous month. Sorry. Yeah. All right. So now this is going to be our total revenue month-to-month label. So what is this measure doing, right? So this measure is going to be a reference label in our card visual. So after we've specified what the total revenue is, so we want a reference label that tells us that okay, this is this is the revenue for the previous month. So how do we achieve this? So first thing first, we specify the variance, right? So we specify a variable and we say the variance is total revenue versus previous month. Then we now use the return function. So we say if the variance is blank, right? So if there is no variance at all, it should return versus previous month and nothing. So instead of just returning blank, that would kind of look unprofessional on our dashboard. So we just said it should return this text instead. Then I also specified another variable. So what this variable is doing is called the absolute variance. So what the absolute function does is that it takes the minus sign out of the value. So for example, if we have a variance, right, our variance can be positive or negative, right? So if our variance is negative, by default, it's going to come with with a negative sign. But I do not want that because I'm going to use an icon to specify if it is positive or negative. So if I'm already doing that, I don't need the negative sign. So that is why I use the absolute function to take away that negative sign. All right, so now we have the icon. So the icon is saying that if the variance is 0, right? So that means if there's no difference between the current revenue and the previous revenue, just return 0. I mean, sorry, if it is equals to 0, just return nothing, right? But if the variance is greater than 0, then return this this character, which is a triangle facing up, right? That means there's a positive difference. If it is greater than 0, there's a positive difference. Then if it is less than 0, return this downward arrow, which means there's a negative difference. Then I'm also going to specify another variable for the formatted value. So the whole reason why I'm using this particular part, so what all this is actually doing, it is just since I'm going to be dealing with millions, right? There's a chance that the difference will be too much and it won't be able to contain the space I'm going to specify in my card. So what this formatted value is is kind of shortening the formatting of the variance. So let's see how it works. So I'm using the switch function. So I'm saying switch true. So switch true means it's just like your if function. So if the first argument passes, it's going to switch it with this format. So I'm saying if the absolute variance is greater than or equals to 1 million, right? So I don't want it to return this entire 1 million. So I want it to return it in this format. So the format that is going to return the absolute variance divided by 1 million. It's going to return it in this format. So what that basically means is if our variance is actually 1 million, instead of returning 1 million, it's going to return what 1.00 m in what euros. So I specified euros here because we're dealing with what an European data set. So the values are in what euros. So I'm going to do the same thing for thousands too. So if it is greater than or equals to 1,000, format it this same way. So if our variance is, let's say, is like, let's say 2,500, it is not going to return 2,500. It's going to return what 2.500. I mean 2.50 what k euros. So that is the whole point of this. That's what this whole thing right here is doing. All right. Then finally, you want to return what the addition of everything we've been doing since. That is what the label itself. So we're now saying what return versus previous month, and also what return what the icon if it is positive and negative. Then leave another space, and also what return what this formatted value. So we're going to see how everything is going to play out when we start creating the cards. So we're also going to create one more for the total revenue, and that is the color. All right. So what this color does is also part of the card, right? So I basically, so I actually want to how would I, okay, so what this color does, it does is that it's so when the total revenue, when the variance when it is equals to 0, I want the font on the card or that reference I want it to be black, right? So if the total revenue, that means the variance versus previous month, if it is greater than 0, I want it to be to be green, because that means there is a positive increase, right? Then if it is less than 0, which is the alternate condition, I want it to be to be red. That means there is a decrease. So that is actually what the label color is doing. All right. So we are done with that for the total revenue. So we're just going to bring in all the other measures real quick. So all right. So now it's the same thing for total cost. So all the other measures, they basically follow the same step that I've been explaining. So we have about 7 measures. So we're going to have to do everything like that for all the measures. So that is why I identified, like, I listed everything out so that it won't take much of our time. So I'll just come here, new measure. Okay, so create the total cost, and new measure versus previous month. New measure, the label, then new measure, the label color. All right. So let me clear my clipboard so we have more space. All right. So now moving to the next measure, which is total margin. So we copy everything. So Control C, Control C. Okay, Control C, Control C. All right. So select this. So we create the measures for the margin. So total margin, previous month, the label, and finally the color. Then measure number 4, which is the sales volume. So with sales volume is the count of all the sales in the fact table. So We copy this. Sorry. Control C. Previous month. Control C. So I just want to create all the measures right now so that we won't have to, come back to it when we are designing the report. So measures, new measure. So sales volume, then previous month. Then, okay, sorry, new measure, label, new measure, and finally the column. All right, so we have 3 more. Okay, so the margin percentage. So this is what the profitability. So this tells us whether the company is really making what any profit or what loss, right? So the margin percentage, it divides what the margin, the sum of the total margin by the what total cost. So that is how we measure the profitability. So we copy this, then do the same thing. Do the same. Oh, sorry. Made a mistake. I'm going to delete this. All right. So copy the MOM label. And finally, the label column. All right. So, okay, so there's something I actually want to show you guys. So let me just copy this, just this. And finally, this too. All right. So new measure. All right. So let's create for the margin percentage. All right. Then we create the previous month versus previous month. All right. Then we create the label. And finally, the label column. All right. So if you notice, I copied the last 2 measures, but I didn't copy everything. So let's just create them first. So this is the total units sold, which is the sum of what the units sold in the fact table. Then lastly, so I also created so we went ask for this, right? But since it was a challenge data set, so you can explore further. So I created a measure that lets us know the pharmacies that are what below target margin. So I selected a target margin of 38%. So how do you get the pharmacies below target margin? So you use count X, right? So count X is an iterator function. So it allows you to define a function, then add what an additional condition. So I'm saying count X, right? Then I'm using the values function. That means I want to count what the values, strictly the values in the dim pharmacy table. So I want to count what the pharmacy ID. Then I'm adding what a condition. So I only want you to return. So I'm telling Power BI that I only want you to return what the amount of what the count of what pharmacy ID if the margin percentage is what less than what 0.38. So that is how what the count X function works. All right. So now we have 2 extra measures, right? And we still have to do all these the remaining DAX measures in the family of each one. So instead of going back and forth copying, so there's something you can do. So we want to create the versus previous month for total units sold, right? So I can just click on this, right? Then I'll just copy it. I'll create a new measure, right? I'll paste it. So since they all work the same way, right? So it's actually a reusable function, right? Since they all work the same way, so all I have to do is to just change anywhere I find sales volume. I'll just change it to what total units sold, and what the measure is going to what work for it. So let's see. So from what we have here, there's sales volume in what three different places. But if you want to start changing it one by one, it's going to be stressful. You might as well continue copying and pasting. So, but there's a way in Power BI that you can select the same values on your DAX at once. So how do you do that? You hold your Control, your Shift, and your L, right? So once you do that, whatever it copies in the first instance, which is this one, it is going to copy it any other place that it is found in the measure. So I'm just going to use my right arrow key to copy the volume also. Then I can just change this to total units sold. So you can see everything is becoming everything is changing at once. So that is the use of Control Shift L in your DAX when you're writing your DAX. So you've created the versus previous month for this. So we also do the same thing too for our pharmacies below target margin. So where is it? Okay. All right. So I'll do the same thing. I'll paste this again. So I'll just copy everything, Control Shift L, right arrow, and I'll just type in pharmacies. So beware, it has like the spelling has to be correct. Although DAX is not really what's it called? DAX is not case sensitive, right? So you can, whether it is capital letter or small letter, it won't really matter. But at the same time, for the sake of uniformity, just try to make sure that the name is correct. So pharmacies below target margin. So you can see. So we'll just click on enter. So we'll do the same thing too for the label. So we'll just copy this. Just Control C. So we'll do the same thing for the two measures. So sales volume, Control Shift L. So total units sold. Then create a new measure again. Do the same thing for pharmacies below. Pharmacies below target margin. And finally, it's the label color. So you just copy, Control C, Control V, then change this to total units sold. And it's the same thing again. Control Shift L, right arrow, pharmacies below target margin. Yeah. So okay, so one thing you guys one thing you have to notice is that when you're defining the DAX function for these pharmacies below target, or when you're defining since we're going to use this for the reference label, right? So you have to know that this is actually contextual. So like the DAX says, if it is equals to 0, that means there was no change. Return the color as black. Then if the pharmacy is below target margin, so like if the variance is greater than 0, equals green. Then if it is less than 0, it should be what? It should be red. So now if there are more pharmacies below target margin, right? That is actually a bad thing for the pharmacy or for the network, right? It is not a good thing, right? So that means we're going to have to change this to less than, right? So that means if there was an increase in pharmacies below target margin, right? It should return what, if there's an increase in pharmacies below target margin, that is what a bad thing for what, for the company. So that means it should return what, a red color, right? Since it is what, it is not really a good thing for a company. But if it is what, if the pharmacies below target margin reduced in respect to the what previous month, right? That is actually what a good thing for what, for the company. That means it should be in what, in green. That is what, the DAX is kind of explaining. All right. So now we are done with all our DAX measures. So one thing we want to do is, when we created this measures table, it automatically came with this column, right? So we want to take it out so it doesn't confuse us. So we're going to what, delete it from the model. Yeah, so we'll delete it. Then, so the last thing we're going to do is to what, group our measures so that we can, easily go through them when we need them. So how do we do that? We'll expand this. So now we want to group our measures what, into folders, right? Since there are four what measures, what, like there are four measures per KPI. So we want to group them into what, a folder, so that it won't just be a long list, and you can always what, expand it when we need it. So how do we do that? You select the first measure, then you select the last, you hold your shift, select the last one, right? Then you come to what, this display folder. Then you just type in the name you want the folder for the folder. I'm just going to put in what, margin percentage, right? So you can see now all our margin percentage, all our measures here what are inside this folder. So you can easily what, drop it down and what, close it back. So we'll do the same thing for all the measures. So we'll select all four of them. So this is actually what, pharmacies below target margin. So all right, so we'll do the same thing for these two. Select all four, sales volume, then do the same thing to select everything relating to total cost. Hold the first one, hold your shift, select the last one. So we'll call this total cost. So then total margin, select everything related to it, call it total margin. Then total revenue, let me put total revenue. Then lastly, total units sold. So that is the last one. We'll just name it what, total units sold. Yeah. So as we can see, so instead of having, that, so let's go back to our report view. So instead of, having the long list of measures we had before, so now everything looks more organized and what's compact. So anytime we need a measure, we can simply just drop down, select it, and, keep it moving. All right. So now that we're done with our measures, so now we can get to the fun part, right? Which is what, actually, creating the report. All right. So what do we start with? All right. So now we want to create a report. So one thing you want to do is we want to bring in our background. That is what, the wireframe. So while designing this report, I designed the wireframe in Figma. So the wireframe is what, is the background, where all your visuals are going to go in. So it's kind of you creating it in Figma. So let me open my Figma. Yeah, so this is it here. So you creating your wireframe, it helps you, organize all your visuals correctly, right? So, and it also, saves you the stress of, going back and forth and, worrying about size and all that. So your wireframe is just like a house plan. So it tells you, where each visual should go, right? So I designed all this in Figma, right? So after designing it, you want to what, export them. So how do you do that? So you click on them. Then, so when it comes to Figma, there are many ways you can export. So you have the PNG, the JPEG, SVG, and PDF. So I actually prefer the SVG because it doesn't reduce in quality, unlike your PNG and your JPEG. So SVG, I've actually exported them before, but I just want to, let you guys know how to export it. So when you export it, it's going to, save as an HTML file in your system. So these are the 3 pages, page 1, page 2, page 3. So that is how it works. So I would have loved to, explain how I did this, but this actually took me like about 3 to 4 hours to design. So it's not really something I can do here. But there are many tutorials on YouTube. I think I've dropped some videos on the group before. So there are many tutorials on YouTube where you can, learn how to design this on Figma. And you can also use PowerPoint to design this too. But I just, prefer Figma because I realized it gave me more design freedom. All right. So okay, so one thing we also need to take note here is the size of our wireframe, right? So the size I used was 2,600 in width by 1,600 in height. So that is very important because we would have to expand the default Power BI canvas size. So by default, so how do we do that? So we'll just come to format, right? Come to canvas settings. So this is the default 16 by 9. So we click on custom. This is the default Power BI canvas size 1280 by 720. So we're going to change that to 2600 by 1600. So this is just something I use. So there's no like standard um, canvas size. Although a lot of people go with this one that is very popular. I think 1920 by 1080. Yeah, so that is a very popular one. A lot of people use it, but and it's it's kind of spacious, right? But there's no standard size. So feel free to expand as much as possible to contain all the visuals you have in mind. So vertical alignment, I prefer it in the middle. Yeah, so the page is in the middle. So now it's time to bring in our wireframe. How do we do that? So we come under image. So since it is an image, so we click on browse, then we'll locate where our wireframes are. So this is where our wireframes are sitting. So I'll bring in the first page, page 1. So yeah, when you bring it in, you're basically going to see nothing because transparency is on 100, right? So we're going to reduce the transparency to 0. Yeah, and like that, we have our wireframe in our canvas. So the first page of our report is the performance overview. So yeah, to save me stress, I actually actually put most of the text. I designed everything right there in Figma, so that I want so that I just I kind of dealt with all the design parts in Figma. I also designed the what's this called, the navigation panel. Yeah, so I also designed the navigation panel right there in Figma, but I'm still going to have to use navigation buttons. So that is like, by the way. All right, so we want to rename this performance. So it's performance overview, but for navigation's sake, I'm going to name it overview because we don't want something too long, and we already called it overview right here in our navigation design. So I'm going to call this overview. All right, so before we get into the design proper, there's one thing I like to do. So since the design part in itself, it is also very repetitive, right? There are a lot of things that you have to keep doing all over and over again. But there's something you can do to save yourself the stress. Because one thing I like to do is I like to stick with a color theme, right? So from the design you've seen so far, so you can see like what I'm going with is basically yellow and green, right? But by default, Power BI, when you select a visual, right, it returns like it displays that visual in blue, right? Like that is like the default theme of Power BI, blue. So that means for every visual I create, I would have to start changing it to match with my design theme. So I want to save myself the stress of doing that for all visuals. So how do I do that? So that means I have to create my own theme. So this is where you come. So under view, you'll find theme. So this is the default Power BI theme, right? So let's click on it. So if we want to create our own theme, what do? We'll just scroll down, right? And we'll come to customize current theme. So we click on this. So as you can see, the default, the primary color of Power BI visuals is what is blue, right? So I want to change this, right? I want my own primary color to be what? To be green. So this particular green I used in Figma. So I already jotted down the color codes. I'm going to bring them in. So this is my primary color, dark green. I'm going to copy the color code, right? I'm going to come here, I'm going to change this. So I'm going to type in the code here. I'm going to just paste it. Yeah, so you can see it has changed. Then, so my secondary color is yellow, right? So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to bring it in here. I'm going to paste it. Yeah. So my tertiary color is actually orange, but not this particular orange here. So I'm just going to bring it from here. And let me just copy this one so let's save time. All right, so yeah, so this is the orange I used here. Then, okay, so I want this to be somewhere here. So this last color is actually the color I use for the background. So it is like a very, very light shade of green. Yeah, I don't want it to affect because moving on. So you can also keep adding colors. So let me just, I don't like this purple. I'm just going to use this blue. I'm going to go with this aqua because it was a visual that I used that I had to use up to 5 colors. So that's why I'm putting the background as at color 6. So you can also name your color, your custom theme, right? So just in case you need it for a project in the future, right? So then I'm just going to call this, let me just call this project theme. So we're done with the colors. So the colors are not the only thing you edit in your theme. So you can come to advanced. Okay. Okay. So you can also select your text. So yeah, I want to use semi-bold, Sergio UI semi-bold. That is like my favorite font. When it comes to font size, I don't really advise you do this here because you can always do this when you're editing the visual, of course. But there's no really point doing this because as you are designing, you'll be using different font size. So there isn't really any point in designing this. Then the font color, okay, we can always, so it's black. I'll leave it as black. Then title. So I want one type of font throughout. I'm going to use semi-bold. Then cards and KPIs. I also want semi-bold, CGI semi-bold. Then, okay, so yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going to leave this as black. Sub headers, semi-bold, all right. Also, in the visuals, we're not going, I usually turn off my backgrounds in all my visuals, so there's no point in, changing anything here since you're going to turn it off anyways. So I don't want borders here, headers. I'm going to turn off. So yeah, this is cool. My headers are usually in black. Then tooltip, yeah. So I'm going to change this. So I want the label text color. I want it to be dark green. The dark green we used. I think it should be this. Yeah. Then the value text color also. I want this to be green too. I'll just paste the color there, color code. And I want this to be green. Then I want the background to be yellow. Yeah, so when we start designing, you will see how this is going to save us a lot of time because it can be really repetitive. All right, so next up is the page wallpaper. Okay, transparency at 0. So we didn't use the wallpaper. So page background, yeah. So I'll just take this to 0. Then the filter pane. Okay, I don't edit my filter. So the filter pane is this stuff here. So I don't really edit it. I like it the way it is like that, white. So yeah, so once we are done, we just click on apply. So now we have about what? We have our new theme here. So it has been added. All right, so now you can save this theme for future purpose. So to do that, you just come to save current theme. So you just click on this, then you save it where you want it to be. So it's going to save as a what? As a JSON file. And let's say in future projects you want to use it. So you just come here. So you come to what? Browse for themes. So you just look for it on your laptop and you import it. All right, so now we can start designing. All right, so the first thing we want to do is bring in our KPI cards, right? So how do we do that? So we come to the build. So we look for the KPI visual, the card visual, sorry. So we click on it, we'll bring it in. So I dedicated this space on the top for the KPIs. So we want to resize this. All right. So the first KPI I want to bring in is the revenue. So instead of trying to search, scroll down, you can just search for your measures here. So I'm just going to type in revenue. Yeah. All right. Okay. Oh, okay. One thing we are meant to change this to euros since we're dealing with an European data set. Then I also want it to be in 2 decimal places. All right. Okay, we're good to go. Then I also want to bring in, so we'll open the format pane. I want to bring in the reference label. So I'll add data. I'm going to say label. I'm going to look for the total revenue reference label. Yeah. All right. So I've brought in the label. Then I'll turn off the title. All right. So now let's start formatting this. So this is how the card looks like. So now I want to format it. So I'll open the format pane, right? So I'll turn off the background. So I want all the backgrounds to go. So I'm going to turn off the background at 3 different places. First one is under the size and style. Then second one is under the multi-card layout. I'll come to background, I'll turn it off. Yeah. Then the last one is on the cards. Also turn off the background and the border and the divider. I just want it to be plain. Yeah, exactly. All right. So now I want to edit the call out. That is what the text part. So I'll come to call out. So the value is a little bit small. So I want this to be, let's use 35. Yeah, that's good. All right. Then also we want to format the label itself because the label is also important. So I'm going to give this, let's go with 18. Yeah, that's good. And I want this to be green. Yeah, so now you can see the whole point of creating a theme. So now we have all our colors that we're going to use. So I want this to be green, right? And I want this to be semi-bold is fine. Then I want this to be on top of the value. Yeah, perfect. All right, so now we're done with the call out section. Then we'll come to the reference label layout, right? So I don't want the background for that too. So I'll turn off the background here under the reference label layout. Turn off the background. I don't want that. Then it's also too small. So I'll come to value. I'll give it 16. Yeah, that's good. All right. So now here comes the use of the label color darks we wrote, right? So I want this to, if there was an increase, I want this to be green. If there was a decrease, I want this to be to be red. So how do we do that? So we come to what? Under the value, we'll come to what? This FX. This means what? Conditional formatting. So I'll open it. All right. So since we already have a DAX measure for the conditional formatting we want to use, so I'll just come to I'll come to what? Field value. And I will search for what? Label. Right. Or let me just search for revenue instead. All right. So now this is the DAX I'm looking for. Total revenue label color. So I'll select it. I'll click on OK. Yeah, so now you can see that it is since it's positive, it is showing what's green, right? So if we use our slicer to select a month and there was a decrease in month on month, it would actually be red. All right. So now this space we have here is for 5 KPIs. So that means we have to bring in 4 more KPIs, right? So instead of building everything from scratch again, good thing with Power BI is once you've designed it once and you want to do the same thing but for another measure, what you have to do is what copy and paste. Then you bring in what you are looking for. So now the next one is what total cost. I'll take out total revenue. Then under value, I'll search for what total cost. I'll bring in total cost. All right, I have to change this to euros. So just come here, change this to euros. Change this to euros. I'll do the same thing for margin. So since it is a monetary value, so I'll change this to euros also. All right. So now back here. All right. So we need to bring in our reference label, right? So we'll just add data. Add label. So we'll search for the cost. So we'll bring in our what? Our label, total cost MOM label, right? Then we have to edit it. So we take out the title, make it 16. Then we'll add our conditional formatting too. So the same way, total cost. So just type for cost. So select the label color darks we used. Yeah. So that is 2/5. So now let's just copy everything out. Let's just copy and paste. So let's just arrange it. So Control V again. Put this one here. And the last one. So we'll keep editing it. All right. So now the next measure is our total margin. So we'll take total cost out. So we'll search for total margin. All right. Yeah. So we also need to bring in our reference labels. So under measures, let's search for labels. So you look for the total margin label. Yeah, the MOM label. All right. So you take out the title. We don't need it. Then you increase this to 16. Conditional formatting, field value. So we just search for margin. All right. So label color. Yeah. All right. So next up is our sales volume. So we'll take out the total cost here again. So values. So we have, so let me just type in volume. All right. So we have our sales volume. Okay. So I want this. So 62K is too vague. So I want this to, be in 2 decimal places. So I'll just come here. I'll select the visual. I'll increase the decimal places. So, okay. I want this to be 2. All right, perfect. All right, so we can close this back. All right, so now we're going to bring in our reference label. So we have sales volume, bring in our reference label, turn off the title, then under value, 16, then the color, field value, yeah, volume. So label color. Okay. And our last visual is the what? So our last visual is the margin. Sorry, total units sold. Yeah, so we'll take this out. So I'm looking for units sold, total units sold. Select it. All right. So same issues I have with that one too. So I'll come to the total units sold, right? And I'll increase this towards 2 decimal places. Yeah. because sometimes rounding up does not really, tell the actual value. So, okay, we've not brought in the reference label. All right. So we just come here, unit sold. We'll look for the label. Yeah, this is it. Then we'll format it, take out the title, then reason 16, conditional formatting, field value, unit sold, label color. Yeah. So we are done with the KPIs, right? So all right. So one thing we want to do is, when you're designing, you need to pay attention to what those little details. So one thing we want to do is we want to make sure they are all on a straight line, right? And the spaces between them are what's equal. So how do we do that? We select all 5 of them. We'll come to format, align. So align middle. Okay, so they're all on the same line. That's why it didn't change. Then also we'll come what distribute what horizontally. Yeah. So now we can be sure that what the spaces between all of them are equal. All right. So now we are done with what all our KPIs. So the next thing we need to do is to bring in our filters. Oh, okay. Let's move to this. All right. So now the next part is what KPI monthly trends. So if you notice back here, the report brief said, how do revenue, units sold, margin change over time? So the stakeholders want to, know how what these KPIs change over time. So now, to visualize that, I am going to use an area chart. Visualize that. Yeah. So now the problem is the stakeholders want to know how three how those three KPIs how they are doing over time, right? But I want to show how all 5 of our KPIs are doing over time. Now the problem is I don't have enough space to visualize 5 what's it called 5 area charts, right, for each of the KPIs. So what do I do? So I'm going to create what is called a field parameter. So a field parameter would allow me to use this single um area chart to visualize all 5 of the KPIs. So let's see how that works. So to create a field parameter, you come to modeling, come to new parameter, come to fields. So I want to rename this parameter, so I'll call it KPIs. So now you input all the fields you want to switch in between in the order in which you want them to appear, right? So the first one I want is the total revenue. Close this back. Okay, I can always search here. I usually forget myself sometimes. Then the total cost, second one. Then the margin is the third one. Margin, total margin. Then the fourth one is I think the sales volume. Yeah, sales volume. And the last one is the units sold, total units sold. All right. So we click on what create. Yeah, so when you create, anytime you create a field parameter, it's actually creating a DAX table, a calculated table, but you can't use it, as part of the data model. So it is like an external table per se. All right, so now we have our parameter. This is it here in the DAX. So let's close all this. This is it here in the DAX column. I mean, in the measures column. All right. So now we can now bring in what's our trend. So now we have our area chart. So now let's format this. So under the x-axis, that's where we're going to need our month name. Our month name. So I'm going to select month. And under our y-axis, I'm going to bring in our KPI. Yeah, perfect. So you can see, like, you're seeing 5 different lines, right? So for each of the metric. So now what this slice allows us to is once we select one value, it will show what only what that particular value, right? So that is how what field parameters work. All right, so now let's format this chart so that they look beautiful. So let's format the area chart first. So how do we do that? So we can close this. All right. So the way I format is I go what option by option. So size and style, I want to take out the background. I don't need the background. I also don't need the title because I already gave it the title back in Figma. Then the x-axis, I want to give this, let's go with 15. Yeah, I want it to be black. Okay, semi-bold is fine. Okay, then I also don't want the title of the x-axis because everyone can tell this is month. So adding month there again, it's kind of like a waste of space. So I'll take it out. Then I move to the y-axis. So on that value, I like using the same thing. So I'll go with 15, color, black, semi-bold, it's fine by me. Then display units, let me leave it as an auto. Then the title, yeah, so I want to leave the title there because we have what different KPIs. So I'm just going to edit the title a bit. So I'll give it 15 also. Yeah. Because when we start switching, so now you can see it's saying total revenue here. So when we switch to total margin, it's actually changing to what total margin. All right. So we're done with the y-axis. So let's keep it moving. So grid lines, I'm not really a fan of grid line, but it's not really that obvious. So I can leave it. All right. Then lines. Okay. So under the line, so line style solid, fine by me. Joint type round, cool. So I want the width to be a little bit thicker. I'll go with 5. And I want the interpolation type to be what? To be smooth. Yeah. So under the smooth type, I want cardinal. Then I will reduce the tension to what? To 0. So it's actually more smoother this way. So the color, yeah, I want it to be green. Yeah. So now the next is the shade area. So the shade area, I don't want you to match line color. I want to use a different color. So I want to use my secondary color, which is what? Yellow. Then I want the transparency to be 70%. Yeah, that's good. Then markers, I don't like markers. I'm not a fan of them. I don't use it. Data labels, I'm not using data labels because I already use the y-axis. So I usually go with either one of them. So if I'm using data labels, I don't use the axis label. If I'm using the axis label, I don't use the word data label. So so yeah, that's all I'm doing for this. All right. So yeah, we're done editing our line chart. So I mean our area chart. So I also have to edit this too, right? This what's it called? The slicer. So I also want to edit this because it's not looking professional. And I also want it to sit right here at this top here so that the user can, easily switch between them. So how do I do that? So I'm going to use what? A button slicer instead of normal slicer. So this is the button slicer here. Yeah, so I'm going to change the grade so everything is going to be what? On a single line. So I'm going to multi-button layout. I'm going to increase the columns to what? To 5. Yeah, so now everything can sit up here. So now I'm just going to put it here, expand it. Okay. So now we can start formatting. So I don't need the background. Turn it off. I don't need the title. Then slicer settings. Yeah, I'm going to turn on single select. Okay. So multi-button layout. Okay, yeah, we've done that. Okay. So now the next thing I want to do is so I want to edit the slicer to make it more presentable. So when you're editing button slicers like this, so there's something called what? There's something called what? States, right? So you have different states in which the slicer can be. So you have the default state, the over. So it all depends on how you want it to look. So how do you want it to look when it's on default? How do you want it to look when the mouse over like overs around it or on top of it, sorry. When it is pressed, how do you want it to look? When the button is selected, how do you want it to look? Mixed and also what's disabled. All right. So I'll first of all select all. So I want to create what a setting that what affect all the states, right? So I'm going to take out the background. So there are many ways you can, edit your button. So this is just how I do mine. One of the ways in which I do mine. So sorry, first thing I want the shape to be just rectangle. Then I took out the background, took out the border also. So yeah, I'm taking out the border. Then I want an accent bar. So I want the accent bar to be at the bottom, right? And I want it to be what? To be green. So that to be in line with our design. All right. So and I want the width. Let's go with 3. All right. So now this is how it is displayed for like for all what for all the conditions. All right. So now the next condition I'm going to do is what when you hover on it. Okay, there isn't really much to do. Yeah. Okay, so now let's go to selected because this is really the important one. So when you select, so when one of the sliders are when one of the buttons are selected, so you don't want it to have the same state, right? So you want it to be obvious that okay, this button is what selected. So now you're basically doing some kind of UI UX with your design. So you want to improve the user experience. So you want it to be a little bit different. It is what selected. So I won't change much, right? I'll just come to this accent bar. I'll increase this to what 7. Yeah, so now you can see total revenue is selected, right? So you can see it is what a little bit different. So you can tell that obviously this is what the selected one. So now I'm just going to close these buttons. So now we're actually not done. So we also have to deal with the what with the call out. So we call it is what the text. So for the all states, right? So all. So I want the text to be in the center, right? And 12 is too much. I mean, it's too small, so I'll just go with 15. Yeah, 15 is perfect. Okay, I'll just go with semi-bold. Let me go with 14 instead. 14 instead. And I'll go with semi-bold. Let's go with 15. And I want it to be green. Yeah. All right. Or better still. Sorry. Okay. Let's go with normal stage UI. Then so when it is okay, so now when you over on it, so this is what over means, like when you over on it. So how do you want it to look? So I want it to be a little bit different. So I'll just give it a little bit. So I just want it to, I'll just increase the text a bit. Yeah, so now when you over on it, so you can see that it is what. So let me just give this semi-bold. So yeah, you can see that there's a little bit of difference when you over on it. Then lastly, when you select it, so when it is selected, I want it to be obvious that it's selected. I'll just give this 18. Yeah, 18. And I'll change this to green. Yeah. And I want this to be bold so that it will be obvious that okay, this is the selected value. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we're done with creating with editing this. So now you can see everything looks like in tune with the design. So mom is calling. Okay, so everything looks in tune with the design. All right. So yeah, so we're done with this section. So let's zoom out. Yeah, we're done with this section. I'm coming. Just a minute. All right. So we are done with this section. So our next visual is, so let's design this pharmacy insights table. So in the pharmacy insights table, let's bring in the table. Okay, let's bring in the table. Let's expand it. Okay, so let's bring in our measures, what we want inside. So Pharmacy insights table, I want the pharmacy name there. So I'm just going to bring in a pharmacy name. Then I also want the total revenue, cost, and the margin. So I'm just going to come here, add data, revenue, total revenue, cost, and margin, the total margin. All right. So now we have to format this table. So let's zoom in. Always feel free to zoom in. All right. So let's format this. So we can close this too. Okay. So because of space, I want to manage the space. So I'll just change how they appear like on this part. So I'm just going to rename this for the visual. So I'll right click on it, rename for visual. So instead of total revenue, I'll just use with what revenue, but I'll have enough space for the columns. So instead of total cost, rename for visual, and just double click on it. Okay, rename for visual. I'll just move the total. I'll go with cost. The same thing for margin. The rename for this visual. So I'll move the total also. All right. Okay, so now let's start formatting. So we can close these two. We don't need them for now. Then we open the format pane. So like I said, step by step. So under the background, we'll take out the background. We don't need it. So title is off. Style presets, I usually go with minimal. Yeah, so it's just, give me the color, one color throughout. For the layout, okay, nothing to edit there. So so the grid, your horizontal grid means, the space between your rows. So let's go with um 5. 5 is good. All right. So I also want the spaces in between to have the same color as the background. So I'm just going to select our background color, which is this one. Yeah, exactly. Then vertical grid lines, I'm not using that. Border. Okay. So I want to change the color of the column header. So this line here, so I'll make it 3, and I will change the color to green. Then finally, options, global font size, I want to use 15. Yeah, okay. 15 is good. Or let's just go with 14. So that's okay. 14 is okay. So you can now expand this a little. It contains the whole thing. Perfect. All right. So we are done with the grid part. So under values, yeah, okay. So text color, I'm fine with black. So background color, I'm going to use our background color, which is this shade of green. So alternate texts, I'll give it black. Alternate text background, this same background also. So yeah, we're done with that. Also column headers, so I'll just make it 15. Yeah, so that it is different from that. So text color, I'm fine with black. Background color, our same background color. Yeah, so everything is in tune. And I want the alignment to be in the center. Yeah, perfect. All right, so we're done with this part. So the totals, I'm not a fan of totals, so I'll just take it out. Then specific column. So I want all the cells to be, or like all the values to be in the center. So pharmacy name, so specific column, that means you can edit each column. So the alignment should be in the center. Then revenue, center. Okay, so I want this to look more professional, right? So I'm going to display it in thousands. I'm going to use 2 decimal places. Yeah. So I'll do the same thing for cost, center, thousands, 2 decimal places, and lastly, margin. What was it called? Thousands, 2 decimal places. All right. So we're basically done. So the last thing we need to do is what? Conditional formatting. So if you notice, I included this in the design, right? So I included this in the design. So the highest is green and the lowest is what? Red. So I'm going to use conditional formatting for all the 3 values so that by just looking at it, the stakeholders will be able to tell from a glance, which of the pharmacies are doing well and which of them are not what doing well with respect to the highest value. So how do you add conditional formatting to your table visual? So you open the build tab again, so we can close this. So you right click on revenue, conditional formatting. So I prefer going with font colors. So click on font color, right? So I'll go with gradients. So I want my lowest value to be, red, like very red. Then the maximum value, the highest, should be green. So I'll just select this. Okay. I just select this green part. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So you can see there's a change. So you keep scrolling down. So the lower the revenue, the redder it's the value gets. Then I will do okay. I don't really like this. So let's just use the green we used in our. So I'll come back to font color. So I want to change this to this green we used here. That's good. Okay. Yeah, I think this is okay. All right. Yeah. So do the same thing for cost and revenue. So real quick, conditional formatting, font color. So we'll just change this red here. Go with this green. Yeah. Then same thing for margin also. Font color, then green, red. Oh, sorry. Lowest is meant to be red. Like that. Yeah. And we'll just go with this green. All right. So let's see, we sort by margin. Okay. So the good thing about table visuals is you can, sort by what? By the columns. All right. So when you scroll down, the lower the values get, the redder the values are. All right. So we're done with this part. So let's zoom out. All right. So now the next is revenue by location. So for that, we're going to use the Azure Maps. I'm going to use the Azure Maps. So to use the Azure Maps, you have to be signed in to Power BI, and your internet connection must be live. Like you have to be connected to the internet. All right. So revenue by location. So with the Azure Maps, we can use our latitude and longitude, and we're giving that in the data set. So we're going to bring in our latitude and longitude. So we'll search for latitude, bring it in. Then same thing for longitude. So bring it in. Yeah. So you can see it has given us points where what. So so the latitude and longitude were given for what? Each what's it called? Each pharmacy. So each pharmacy has its own latitude and longitude. That's why there are many points here. All right. So we want to, so the size will bring in the revenue. So that means the bigger the revenue, the larger the dots on the map. So all right. So okay, so one more thing we want to do is when we hover on a point, we can only see the longitude, latitude, and the revenue. So we actually can't, tell what that pharmacy is or where the pharmacy is located. That is what your tooltip is for. So under tooltips, so we'll come to, so we'll now drag out all those necessary information into the what tooltips. For example, the pharmacy name, we put it under the tooltip. Then the city it is located, put it under the tooltip. What else? The region and also the country. Yeah. So now when we hover on a dot, so we can see what the total information of what of that pharmacy. All right. So let's format this a little bit. So we'll take out the title, take out the background. That's actually all. Okay. So okay. All right. So you can change how you want it to look. So let's go with road. Yeah. All right. So that is that on revenue by location. Okay. So next up is revenue by promotion status. So now we want to know if promoting the sales, like the sales that had promo, did it have any effect on the watch revenue? So so let's say, so we want to know whether the promoted sales, like did they bring in more revenue or not? So let's see. So how do we display that? So we're going to go with, let's go with a donut chart. So we expand it. So under values, we'll bring in the revenue, total revenue. Then under legend, we'll bring in the promo flag, which tells us whether it was a promoted sale or not. Bring in a promo flag. Yeah. So would edit it also. So take out the background, take out the title. Then legend, I prefer legend to be at the top center. Then I'll give it 15, color black. Then okay, I'm going to leave the title. So I'll change this promo flag to promotion status instead. Status. All right. Okay, that is actually too long. So let me just leave it as promo flag. All right. So let's zoom in. Okay. So the next point to edit is the slices. Okay, so I'm cool with the color. The border is turned off. So the spacing, I usually go with 85. So I prefer it thinner. All right. Okay, so we'll close the slices. Detail labels. Okay. So we increase the values to, let's go with 15. Use black. Let's go with 16 instead of 17. Yeah, 17 is good. All right. So we are done with that. Yeah, so from this we can see that when the promotion status was yes, when the sales was promoted, it brought in more revenue than what sales that were not what's promoted. All right. So now the last visual here is what is the top 5 countries by revenue and cost. So to display that, we're going to be using a clustered column chart. All right. So we'll bring this in here. All right. So under our x-axis, we're going to bring in our country. Then under the y-axis, we're going to bring in our revenue and cost. So first of all, bring in the revenue, and secondly, the cost, total cost. All right. So we said top 5, right? So we don't want to show the whole thing. So top 5. So how do we do that? We'll do it with the filter panel. So we'll filter this visual. So filtered on this visual. So we want to, filter the country. So we need only the top 5 countries. So filter type will be what? Top N. So top 5 by what? By total revenue. So you can only sort it by what? By one value. So I'll just go with the total revenue. So we want to see the countries that bring in what? The most revenue. So you apply filter. Yeah, so now we have what? Only the top 5. All right, so as usual, let's format this. So we can close this now. Take out the background. Take out the title. We already have a title. X-axis. So we'll go with 15. Black. Then the title, you can take out the title because we already set up 5 countries, right? And everybody can tell those are countries, so we don't need to use the title. Then you will go ahead with the what? With the x-axis. So same formatting, 15, semi-bold, black. Then you can also choose to take out the title, right? Since both the total revenue and total cost are both in euros, so you can choose to take out the title. So legend, so subcenter, there's no legend title, so give it 15, make it black. Yeah, we are good to go. Grid lines, a grid line is fine. What else? All these are actually fine. Yeah, so that is that. So we are actually done with the first page of. Okay, no, I'm actually not done. So we have to bring in our filters too, like that. All right. So the first filter is year. So the filters I'm going to go with I'm going to go with the drop down. So slicer, sorry, I said filter. Slicer. So under the field, I'm going to go with the year. Exactly. So I'm going to change this to a drop down. So format, slicer settings, style, I want it to be a drop down. Right. So now I'm going to no. Okay. So I'm going to drag this. I want to make sure it fits in here. Right. So I'm going to edit it. So I don't need the slicer header. I already have my header from Figma. I'll take out the slicer header. Then the values, I want it to be 14 is okay. Let me see. Yeah, 14 is good. Or let's even go with 15. Yeah, 15 is good. And I want it to be green. Okay. Then I want the background to be this so that it blends in naturally. I want the background to be this. Exactly. So then I have to take out the initial background. Yeah. So let's zoom in to make sure. All right. Okay. So yeah, we're good. So we'll just copy and paste instead of building from scratch. We'll just copy and paste it. We'll drag this here. So we'll just change this to month. Month. So we'll bring in the month. Okay. So same thing. Copy and paste. All right. So we bring in the country. Country. And finally, we'll bring in the brand. All right. So take this out, add data, bring in the brand. All right. So yeah. Okay. So now there's also one more thing. So let's just confirm. Okay. So let's confirm the filters are working. Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. Okay. Okay. So it seems okay, I didn't mark the date table as our calendar table. So that is why the it is not working. These reference tables are not showing values. So how do I do that? So I'll click on dim date, calendar options. I'll mark it as date table. I'll click on, so I'll turn it on. I'll choose the date column. Done. So yeah, it should work now. Yeah, perfect. All right. So if we noticed, right, if you notice that when we selected a month, so let's deselect the month. When we selected a month, it showed us just a singular point, right? So that is default, but it's actually wrong, right? Because this is a monthly trend. So we want it to show the entire monthly trend at all times. So what do we do? It means we have to what? We have to turn off the interaction of this filter for this what visual. So how do you do that? You select the filter, you come to format, come to edit interactions. So it will show you what all the interactions on what all your visuals. So you just locate the one for this line chart here. So you have two options. You have the filter and you have what none. So you what select none. Okay, since I would have to zoom in. Okay, this so I have to take this out first. Yeah. So you select none. Okay. Sorry, not that filter. So yeah, you select this visual. I mean this slicer, and you select none. Yeah. So now we should have the full. Yeah. All right. So now you can now bring this back in. So you can turn off the edit interactions. Turn it off. Yeah. So now we can bring this back in. All right. So we are done with page one. So we have everything we are looking for right there. All right. So let's just check. All right. All right. So let's quickly see if we can do. Um, okay, so I think time is fast spent, but let's see if we can bring in anything in page two. So our second page will bring in the image. So we'll change the canvas settings, custom 2600 by 1600, alignment middle. Yeah, all right. So second page is regional performance. Let's go with region. All right. So we can bring in our filters same way. So you just select all of them. So Control C into region. So I don't want to sync them. So sync means when you change it in one page, it would affect it across all the pages, but I do not want that. So this is here is pharmacy type. So I will change this. I'll take out the brand and bring in pharmacy type. Yeah, so pharmacy type. All right. Okay, so you might be wondering why this place is blank. So this is actually meant for the reset button. Let me just do it now. Although I usually prefer bringing it towards the end, but I can just bring it in now. So I'll create a blank button. Right, I'll use a blank button. So I'll place it. Let me zoom in. So then I have to format it. So button style. I'll take out the border. I don't want icon. So I'll for the text, I'll put in what reset. So what I want this button to do is I want this button to what? Clear all filters. So that is why I'm using reset. So let's make it 15. I'll give it the color green. I'll use bold. All right. Then I'll come to action. So the action I want the button to carry out. So I'll come to what? Clear all slicers. Right. Then under the tooltip, I'll just put clear slicers so that when someone hovers on it, person will be able to see the what instruction. So they have clear slicers. So let's come back here. Okay. So let's arrange it. Yeah. All right. When I click on it, so I'll hold control and I'll click on it. So it's meant to clear all slicers here. It has cleared all slicers and it cleared this one too. So we'll just select this back. All right. So we'll just copy and paste it in the next page too. All right. So now we're in page 2, regional performance. So this page tells us which regions and pharmacies are driving performance and how do they compare and where should we focus our attention. So we're going to bring in KPIs. So I actually use 3 of the KPIs from the initial page on this second page. So in this, I think I use going to use the total revenue, total cost, and the units sold. So I just want to cover as much as we can today. So we'll be able to finish the whole thing tomorrow. All right, so I'm going to place this here. So no need of reformatting it again. So I'll place this here too. Then I'll place this here. So I'm going to bring in 2 new KPIs. I'll just copy and paste this. I'm going to bring in the margin percentage, which tells us the profitability and also pharmacies that are number of pharmacies that are below target margin. So to change this, I'll just take this out. Same way we did before. Margin percentage. So I'll bring this in. Okay, so I have to change this to percentage format. So under measures, margin percentage, click on this. So I'll click on percentage. Yeah, perfect. All right. So back here, so I can close this. So back here, I'll bring in my reference label. I'll just type label. So where is it? Yeah, margin percentage. So same thing we did. Take out the title. So under value, so I think we use 16. Yes. So for the color, we have to use the conditional formatting, the DAX we created for it. So I'll just type in margin. Yeah, so the margin percentage was label color. Yeah, perfect. So copy and paste this again for the last one. So the last one is, I think, the okay. So the pharmacist below target margin. So pharmacist below target margin. Good. So we need to bring in the reference label. So we'll come to reference labels, add data. So I'll just type MON email. So pharmacist below target margin. Then we have to change the color. So we'll take out the title, then the color. Uh, so this was 16 years. Okay, so field value. So pharmacist below target margin, label color. Yeah. Right. So we can see that what it is red, right? That's because if there's an increase in pharmacies below target margin, that is not a good thing for the business. So that is why what the color is red. So that was what I was trying to explain at the beginning. That when you are writing the DAX for your conditional formatting, it should be what contextual. All right. So let's just make sure all this they're all on a straight line. So align center, then distribute vertically. All right. So last thing I would like to add. Okay, so you must be noticing that I left a lot of space for this KPI section. Not because I included what a line trend or what a monthly trend for each of the what KPIs. Right. So how do we do that? So I also use what an area chart here. So I'll just bring it in. Then under the x-axis, I'm going to use the month. So I'm using the month. Then under the y-axis, so the first one is what revenue. Revenue. So yeah. So under the formatting, so we're going to take out everything, right? We'll take out everything since it is a trend. So we only need what the visual itself. So we'll take out every single thing. The axis, the y-axis, take out everything. Yeah. All right. So let's reshape this. Okay. Let's bring this down a bit. Yeah. All right. So let's continue formatting. You don't need the grid lines. Okay, it's off. Okay. So for the lines, we'll make it smooth. Cardinal tension 0. Yeah. So what else? The green is fine. Then for the shade area, so I'll make it yellow. Yeah, and I'll give it 70, just like the former page. Right. All right. So yeah, so we've designed this. It's kind of obstructing. Let me just bring this down a bit. All right. So I don't want it to obstruct. I'll just raise it up a bit. Okay, I think that's fine. Can I reduce this? Okay, yeah, okay, this is fine. All right. So I'll do the same thing. So I'll just duplicate all this. I'll duplicate it 4 more times. And it's Control V. So that's since I'm going to use the same formatting for all of them, I will just change what the the y-axis. So all right. So I'll come here. I'll change total revenue to total cost. Okay. So as expected, they both follow the same trend. Um So I'll change this to units sold, y-axis to total units sold, total units sold. Yeah, okay. That has a different trend. Then the margin percentage. So the margin percentage. Okay. Then also we want to see pharmacies below target margin. So we want to know also how that was trending across the year. So I'll just add that pharmacy below target margin. All right. So we have our 5 KPIs and our 5 trends. All right. So the same problem we had in the first page. If we select a month, it will really show us the dots. That's because the month filter is affecting the chart. So we don't want that since it is a trend. So we have to turn off the interaction between the month filter and the area charts. So we'll select the month filter. We'll come to format, edit interactions, and would what select what's none for all 5 of them. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So now the month filter is no longer what's interacting with what these visuals over here. All right, turn it off. So yeah, perfect. So same thing, and we switch. Good. All right. Okay, so is there anything we can quickly do? Time is fast spent. Okay, so I think we can just add this since it's the same thing. So let's just copy this map here since we've already formatted it. Copy and paste. So since we're doing margin by location, right? So we'll just drag it here. All right. Okay. Then we'll just take out the revenue and bring in the margin percentage in the size. Say what margin percentage. So this tells us the locations that what have the what highest profitability. All right. So let's zoom out. Okay. So when we hover on it, yeah, so we can see all the information we need about each of the what locations. So yeah, I think we should stop here for today. And so tomorrow we'll just do the remaining, the second page. We'll finish this and the third page. Then we'll add the interactions for the page navigation. And I would show you guys how to, extract insights from your charts. All right. So okay. Okay, so does anybody have any question based on what I did so far?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah, this is Abdulgani. Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Um, I want some clarification where
All right.
you use the DAX function. You
Okay.
created a DAX where you created a label for the card visuals, and
Yeah.
the other one is you were creating some variables in the DAX. Please help us explain the two, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let me open the DAX. Okay, so let's use the. Okay, so you meant this, right? The label.
Yes, the labels.
All right. Okay, so the whole point of this label is to achieve this text right here in the card. This versus previous month is equal. So I want to, show the increase, like by how much did you. So let's take this total revenue as an example. So I want to visualize, so I want to show the stakeholders that, okay, our total revenue for this month is 55.12K, 12,000. But I also want to show that, okay, compared to last month, how much did it increase, right? So that is what this label is doing. Let me explain it. So first of all, I need to get the difference, right, between our current revenue and the what and the previous revenue, right? Are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you, sir.
Yeah. All right. So that is what this measure is for. Total revenue versus what previous month, right? So I defined a variable for the current month, which is what our total revenue, like our current revenue. Then for the last month, so this is actually meant to be revenue last month, like last month's revenue. So I just used last month. So I use the word calculate function to get the word total revenue using the word date add. You can also use the so if this is too complex, right? You can just go with previous month. So you still get the same thing. So you can use previous month, dim dates, right? So you still get the same thing. So this is basically just to what get the what revenue for the what previous month, right? Okay, it is giving me an error. Okay, I already used that particular formula for it. So but if you use previous month, you get the same thing. So that's not to scatter all this. So this is to get what the revenue for the what previous month. Then I now say okay, return if the revenue for the last month is blank, like if there's no revenue for the last month, right? Say for example now we only have 2 years, right? That means if we select January 2024 for example, there won't be a revenue for the what previous month because our data set starts from what January 2024. You understand? So if that scenario should happen, right, it should give us what blank, right? Otherwise, that means on a normal day, subtract the last month from the what current month. So to get what the difference. Now, to now get what that reference label. So the first thing is to what define what the variance, right? So this is the variance, the difference between both of them. So now we also have to write the DAX to get what this previous month and also what this arrow. So how do we achieve that? So let me open this again. So after defining a variable that what returns the difference. So the reason why I use underscore variance is because of variance is a reserved keyword. It is what it's a reserved keyword in the sense that it is also a function. If I should just type in variance, it is not going to work. Power BI is going to consider it as as a function. That is why I added this underscore. So underscore variance is equal to total revenue versus previous month. That is what the variance, the difference. So I'm now saying that return. So I want to now return the variable. So I'm saying so I use the if function because I want to define conditions now. So I use the is blank. So I'm basically saying if this variance, the difference between both of them, if it is blank, it should give me this, right? Instead of just giving me a normal blank, like blank visual, it should not give me blank, it should give me this particular one. So if there is no if the variance is blank, should return this, right? Now, the alternate condition, that is if variance is not blank, then I now defined another variable called absolute variance, ABS variance. So what this absolute variance is doing is it is returning it's giving me the absolute of the variance. So what does absolute do? Absolute basically takes the negative sign from the value, right? So in the case where there was a negative increase, like there was a decrease. So if there's a decrease in the difference, by default, it's meant to come with a negative sign, right? But I do not want that negative sign to show in the visual, right? That is why I'm using absolute, so that it will just give me what? The value itself, the absolute value. Then I also what? Define what? Variance for the what? For the icon, right? So this icon is used when what? So um if there's an increase in the what, in the difference, right? I want it to what? Display what? The upward arrow. If there's a decrease, what? The downward what? Arrow, right? So that is why I'm using what? This if function. But don't worry, I'm going to send what? The file. I have everything that I'm using in the Google file, so you'll be able to go through all the DAS functions, and you'll be able to recreate this yourself if you want to. So I'm basically saying what? If the variance is what? Equal to 0, give me nothing, right? There's nothing to display since there's no variance. If it is 0, return what? Nothing, right? Don't display what? Any what? Icon. But if the variance is greater than 0, that means there's a what? There's an increase, right? Why? If it is what? Not greater than 0, there's a what? Decrease. You understand? So that is what for the icon. Now another variable again for the what? Formatted value. So now you must notice in this, you notice that in this what? In this total revenue card. So the reason why I use this is because, so the reason for this whole part here, let me reduce it. So the reason for this whole variable here is to just get what? This effect, right? This 4.7k. Because if I didn't use that on a normal day, to just give me the exact value, 4,700 and something, right? And if it is in millions, it's going to give me the entire millions. And that would be, too long, for the card, right? That is why I used this variable. So that's why I called it what? Formatted value. So I'm using the switch function. So you can also use the if function to give it the same thing. So I'm saying switch true. That means if the condition meets if the condition is true, you should switch it to. So I'm saying what? If the absolute variance is greater than what? 1,000, right? Then she return it what? In this format. So this format is going to return it in what? So if it is 1 million, it's going to return it as what? 1.00 what? M euros. That is what this format is doing. So it's going to what? Divide the value itself by what? 1,000, then return it to what? In this format, right? Then also, if it is what? Greater than or equals to what? 1,000, to do the same thing, it will give me what? So let's say the value is what? 1,200. For example, what we add there, it's going to what? Divide it by what? 1,000 and what? Return it in this what? Format, including the what? Euros. And lastly, if it is just a value that is what? Less than 1,000, that is what? This last part here, to just return it as a what? As a normal value, which is what? This format here, with the what? With the euros. Understand? So that is all this part that has to do with the formatting and the versus previous month. So after doing all that, we now want to return the value itself at the end. So we now say, well, what? We will now close this final variable. We'll now use our another return finally to return the final value. We'll now say return versus previous month. Then so you can say I left a space there so that the space will be obvious. So and also return the variable for the icon, right? So it's going to return the icon if if it meets this value, it's going to return the icon. So that is the use of a variable. That means I didn't use the variable. I'd have to type all this inside here again. So that is the use of variables. Then and then also another space again. And also you should also include then another and again. So I'm trying to concatenate the values. And to also return the formatted value. So it would pass everything. So if the value is greater than 1,000, I'm going to format it. And if it is within this range, 1,000 range, I'm going to return it in this format. So that is actually what it does. So I'm going to finally return everything versus previous month and icon and also the formatted value. So that is how I'm able to get the text. So for the last part, which is the color itself. So we want to add more context to the card. So if there was an increase in revenue, right, that's a good thing for the business. They made more money, right? So you want to, let that show also in the card. So how do we do that? So we also write the DAX measure. So this is basically a conditional formatting measure, right? So I'm basically saying if total revenue versus previous month, that is what the difference between revenue of each month. If it is greater than 0, that means there was no increase. I said you should use the word color black, right? So that since my default font was black, so that's why I went with black, right? That means the color should be black. So there was no increase or decrease. So there's nothing to change about. So they just use black, right? So I'm not saying if the total revenue versus previous month is greater than 0. That means if there was an increase, right? That means you should return green, since green signifies positive, right? So if there was an increase in so if there was an increase compared to last month, should return green, right? Otherwise, it should return red. That means if there was a decrease, it should return red. So that is how that's work. So like I explained earlier too. So yeah, so you can see in this particular part there was a decrease. That is why it is returning red. So now, but in this case, so like I said, your conditional formatting measure, it has to be it has to be contextual. What does that mean? So when we look at this measure, it says pharmacy below target margin. So let me open it. All right. So if we have pharmacies that are performing below target margin, right? That means they're not meeting their monthly target. That is actually a bad thing for the company. So if we have an increase month over month in pharmacies that are not meeting their targets, that is actually not a good thing for the company, right? So you have to reflect that in your DAX too. That is why you can see there's an increase versus previous month. That means the previous month was 6. This month is 8. So there was an increase. But I use the functional formatting as red, right? Because it is not a good thing for the company. That is why it is red. So in my DAX formula, so instead of this being positive, I mean instead of this being greater than, it is less than. So if there was an increase, if it is less than 0, right, that means if there was a decrease, right, it should be green. Else it should be red. That means if there was an increase, it should be red. So that is basically what that functions did. So I hope you understand now.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. All right. So any other question? Okay, so it seems there are no other questions. All right.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Okay, good evening. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, how can we get the exact copy you use, like the data you use for this DAX function Power BI, sir?
Okay, yeah. I'm going to send. Okay.
So if you want to make any practice, so we can use exactly as the.
Yeah. So let me paste the Google Drive link. Okay. So I have added all. Okay. So this is the link to the Google Drive containing all the material. So I'll paste it in the comments so you can copy it.
Okay.
So it contains the data sets, the what's it called? Contains the data sets, the DAX measures, the DAX file, and also the wireframe backgrounds.
Okay, sir. Sure, please, sir. Is it this Mr. Blazé Samad?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That's a question.
All right. Okay, so any other question? All right, so we're going to continue tomorrow, same time. So
Yeah.
we'll finish the second page.
Good
All right.
evening, Mr.
I think
Abdulsamad.
there's
Thank
a question.
you for your contribution.
Okay.
And then because of our time and for the Muslim faithful among us, we will be calling it a day at this point, and then we'll be continuing tomorrow. So we sincerely appreciate your contribution, Mr. Abdulsamad. Thank you so much for your time and for your efforts. Thank you. See you guys tomorrow.
You're welcome.
All right.
All right, see
Have
everyone
a
tomorrow.
good day. Masalam. Thank you.